welcome to Girls Lunch, your mealtime companion, where we talk about food, gender, sexuality, and where everyone is welcome.
I'm Julia Andreas.
I'm Nicole Hilton.
And Nicole, have you ever written a recipe?
I don't feel confident saying that I have, written a recipe. I have definitely adapted recipes, as I think a lot of cooks do, of I read this in my cookbook and I'm going to take this out and maybe add this in instead, or I'm going to do less of this, more of this. I've never written a recipe fully from scratch, but I have heavily adapted or modified recipes, because that's way easier than writing a recipe from scratch.
Yeah, it is. You don't really think that writing a recipe is hard, but it is definitely harder than you think.
Because you also have to test everything too,
yeah.
Right?
And there's a lot of testing that goes into it. You don't really think about what you're doing while you're cooking. I don't know, especially for me, when I'm cooking at home, it's just kind of what David and I call freestyling, where it's just you're not measuring, you're not thinking about it, you're just cutting stuff up and putting it together and making
it's a little of this, a little of that,
yeah,
with my Italian hands.
With the Italian hands, you make it the pizza pie. But yeah, I mean, that's really how a lot of recipes were before. About 150 years ago, there wasn't really a recipe format. You can't see the quotes I'm making with my hands, but a recipe format. And it was just kind of people writing down I chopped up this bell pepper and this carrot and then a mushroom, and then I put it in the pan, and then I cooked it, and then I put it somewhere else, and there you go, I have a pilaf.
Yeah, I've noticed that I've inherited some recipe boxes from my grandma, which had some recipes in there from her mom, so my great-grandmother. And yeah, a lot of those are just it's just a list of ingredients.
Yeah.
And it's mostly so that you have ratios for how much of this to the, so it's just I have a brownie recipe that is just ingredients. And it's yeah, And I'm no, in what order do I mix them? Do I beat that,
Yeah.
And also I have noticed with older recipes, like you said, there's not always a lot of quantities. It's just you said, a pepper or some salt, and it's there's so much variability of just some.
I was baking something. I don't remember what I was baking, but I was on a food blogger website, and I clicked the little TOC thing at the top that was supposed to take me to the recipe, and it just took me to the ingredients list, but it did not list the amount of each ingredient that we needed, and I got so illogically mad because I didn't know how much flour or how much sugar I needed, and I was just this is a stupid dumb recipe. And then I scrolled a little further and there was actual amounts, but
yeah,
something that would not have happened to Fannie Farmer because she was very diligent in her recipes, and it's because of her that we can have the standard recipe format that came about 150 years ago.
Ooh.
So let's talk about Fannie Merritt Farmer. I'm pretty sure, Nicole, you have heard of Fannie Farmer before.
I sure have. I don't know much about her background, but I know. I mean, I don't want to preview too much, but I know, she's the Boston Cooking School and establishing cookbooks and measurements and such. But I don't know. I know the generalities. I don't know a lot of the details, which is why I'm here to learn.
Well, hold on to your chef hat and apron.
Oh, okay. I have a little rat under there that tells me the good jokes to make for the podcast.
Oh, so your ratatouille does jokes?
yeah, my ratatouille does jokes.
So let's talk about the early life of Fannie Farmer. So, she was a woman in the 1800s, so of course there's not a whole lot recorded about her, but Fannie Merritt Farmer, Merritt being her mother's name, was born in 1857 just outside of Boston as the eldest of 5 daughters. One daughter died in infancy, but 4, including Fannie, grew to adulthood. She definitely gives, as you'll learn, eldest daughter energy.
I know it so well, being an eldest daughter myself.
Same. But all 4 of these sisters received schooling, and the family, like, super valued education.
Nice.
And a lot of memoirs and just interviews with Fannie's family, like her cousins and such, they talk about how, like, their family was super practical and really, really valued, like, a good education above all else. Like, even though they had 4 daughters, they were like, they all need to be educated.
They gotta get learned.
Yeah, they gotta get learned. So learned that 3 sisters became teachers.
It's the ultimate learned.
Yeah.
When you go on to learn other people.
3 sisters became teachers, and only one of them was married. Cora was her name. And Fannie was considered especially smart out of her sisters, and she was on track to go to college. You know, this is like 70 something, and she's going to, like, albeit like a female university probably, but still a university. People often describe her as being, like, energetic, and I didn't know this, but she is a ginger. She had red hair.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So yeah, in high school she was on track to go to college, but then she had a pretty unfortunate incident. As one childhood friend recalled, they were going to meet up, she and Fannie, to have their tintypes taken. So like a early sort of photograph, get their little pictures taken. But Fannie Farmer never showed up. She learned later that Fannie had maybe polio, maybe a seizure. The historical documentation on this is pretty vague because probably back then they didn't even know. But she had fallen when she had gotten out of bed that morning and she couldn't use her legs.
Oh.
And so it was pretty serious. She was paralyzed and her family nursed her back to health, but she was bedridden for many years before she recovered enough to walk with a limp. And so this is in high school. She recovered enough in her 20s to be able to, like, you know, walk with a limp and, like, actually start working again. But her disability made her less desirable as a marriage prospect.
Cool.
And so she kind of had to go into work. Although, honestly, from, like, what I've read about Fannie, I don't know if she would have been interested in marriage anyway. It seems like she was, like, a brains over romance kind of gal. But yeah, when she was in her 20s, she became a paid mother's helper to the neighboring Shaw family. So essentially kind of like a nanny, or like helping out with the laundry and stuff.
Oh, so like a domestic.
A domestic worker. But then at the age of 30 in 1887, she kind of was like, okay, I need to get back into education. I want to be back in academia.
Girl, same.
Yeah. And that part made me think of you a lot. I was just like, oh, yeah, eldest daughter energy. And so she enrolled in the Boston Cooking School for a 2-year course. And there she absolutely excelled.
As a good eldest daughter would.
As a good eldest daughter whose family valued education and who was on track to go to college. And she was super passionate about it. A niece in the family remembered Fannie Farmer's mom, Mary Watson Merritt Farmer was her name, looking dubiously at her daughter's culinary experiments in the farmer kitchen and calling them, quote, these cooking school messes, end quote.
Dang.
And so clearly Fannie was, like, having a great old time experimenting in the kitchen and, like, learning all of this stuff. Obviously, she was well loved because after graduation, Fannie stayed as an assistant to the principal, Carrie Dearborn. And in 1893, Principal Dearborn resigned, and the trustees elected Miss Farmer as the head of the school. She, like, jumped in, and people were like, she's great. She should be the one in charge.
Yeah.
And then she was.
I'm just looking at the, like, quote from her mom of, like, these cooking school messes, and I'm thinking a lot about how, like, as a culture, we, like, discourage girls from making messes. I'm just thinking of, like, how my brother, like, was a big experimenter, like, in the kitchen, or, like, with, you know, little science kits and stuff like that. That's something that's often rewarded for, like, young men and boys, but girls are not supposed to get messy, I guess. But I'm glad that Fannie was not deterred and she continued to make messes, and eventually probably something tasty.
Oh yeah, as we will get into, she had some pretty well-loved recipes. And so as principal of the Boston Cooking School, she was also a teacher. As people have described her, she was incredibly interested in everything to do with eating. She didn't really care about her clothes. It's said that her sisters needed to encourage her to dress up a little when she went to lectures.
That's funny.
And she wore the uniform. She often wore the uniform that her students did, which is like a little white hat. It's like if you ever see like a picture of her, she kind of has like what looks like a little nurse's hat on and then like an apron. And so that's like what her students wore, and that's like what she wore. Her students said that she was a great presenter and like that she could cook at her demonstrations and like explain each step and like not miss a beat, and it was all like direct and clear. It was like watching a really good Food Network show.
I was just thinking, I was like, she's serving like Food Network Rachel Ray realness like 100 years before.
Absolutely, yes. And she was like so enthusiastic. People said that she had like the same enthusiasm for cooking that one would have for music or art, which makes a lot of sense to me because this very clearly like was a passion for her. She was very passionate about this. Her niece once described how Fannie would often like go around with the stuff that she made and ask people like, how can this be improved? Like, how can this be better? So she was also kind of like a perfectionist, but very passionate about what she did. They also say she had a healthy appetite, and she described dishes as like tasty and delicious and things, and liked to eat and didn't care, which doesn't sound weird to us today, but thinking about this is the Victorian era.
Yeah. You don't want to be talking about any kind of like biological needs, you know?
Yeah.
It's just as bad as talking about your poop, probably.
Yeah, or you don't want to like seem as though you are gluttonous or like overly passionate about something. There was a big sense of like you wanted to, especially for like a lady, to not be so visceral in your descriptions, using words like tasty.
You got to tie all that back.
And also kind of in juxtaposition to the time that she was in, Fannie Farmer hated like boring dinners, like boring, boiled, unseasoned dinners, and she liked novelty and ornament.
Ooh.
And so for her recipes, there would be things with like extremely specific placements or like decorations and spicings, and it was definitely like a juxtaposition to like boil some chicken, or even like the jello-y salads that were in fat at the time. In one of her Boston Cooking School cookbook recipes, she would have like chicken salad or salmon salad cupped in a lettuce leaf, or a recipe for tomato jelly would have it molded and trimmed to look like fresh tomatoes.
Ooh.
And have like sweetbreads and cucumbers stuffed into cucumber boats, essentially like a lot of charcuterie boards. And she really liked sort of adding a bit of like novelty or whimsy into cooking, which I feel like people don't really think of when they think of her, because she's also like very much about standardization, as we'll get into.
Yeah, I feel like if you see a picture of her, she looks very like down to business. But I think that's also just true of like photographs of the time. It's like you had to sit so still. Everybody looks like really uptight.
So Fannie went on to be the principal at the Boston Cooking School. During her time there, she decided that the Boston Cooking School's cookbook, which at the time was called the Mrs. Lincoln's Boston Cookbook, needed an update. And so, for context, Mrs. Lincoln was an early teacher at the school. She was also a writer for the Ladies' Companion home magazine.
But not like Mrs. Abraham Lincoln.
No, not related to Mrs. Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, because you like it does say like I'm looking at the notes compiled by Mary Lincoln, and I'm like, oh, like Mary Todd Lincoln, her?
No, not Mary Todd
okay.
Lincoln. I'm pretty sure.
Okay,
That would be wild. Anyway, so Fannie was like, this book is like not up to my standards, and it has too few recipes, and the instructions are inadequate, and it's boring, so I'm just gonna write it and make it better. And so she did. She took the book and she essentially wrote like a new version of it. Dexter Perkins, her nephew, described Fannie limping up and down the room as she dictated her own manuscript to his mother, her sister. It seems to be like a very close family affair, with Fannie just being like, work all the time. And so she wrote this new version of the book, which is what we now know today as the Boston Cooking School Cookbook, or as I have in my notes, the BCSCB.
Exactly. I think that's what I was trying to think of earlier when I was like, I know that she was related to the like Boston Cooking School. Mm-hmm. I think I was looking for the Boston Cooking School Cookbook.
Yeah.
Which also feels a little bit like Cusco's Poison, the poison belonging to Cusco.
It really does. And so Fannie Farmer took her manuscript and she went to the publisher Little Brown to publish the text. And again, this is like a woman in like the late 1800s being like, publish my book, please. And they were cautious about it because they were like, I don't know, you're a woman and this is a cookbook. And they told her that she had to pay for publication costs and that they would really only distribute the book as her agent. And Fannie Farmer was like, yeah, sure, whatever.
She said, okay, bet.
Yeah, she did say, okay, bet. And she did negotiate her contract, and so that she kept the rights to the Boston Cooking School Cookbook.
Girl boss.
She did. She girl boss. And so she accepted the risk, and she definitely made the money she spent back, and then some. The Boston Cooking School Cookbook was published in 1896 and was incredibly popular. It was a super like neatly designed book, and it had space for notes from cooks as they're cooking, and it also had ads for timely items like Knox gelatin and Hub ranges like stoves. And these ads actually helped her finance the first edition. And so like several other like cookbooks were out in the market in 1896. But just imagine, like, maybe a bunch of little boats floating on the water, and then, like, a giant iceberg falls, and just, like, a tidal wave just sweeps all those boats away. And that's what the BCSCB was. It was a giant, It's
like a Viking ship.
And it just, like, blew all the other ones out of the water. It was just so incredibly popular. It's kind of like The Joy of Cooking, or other just huge, absolutely, like, biblical
like everybody
level.
Has one
Everyone
of these.
has one, yeah, kind of cookbook. And I mean, like, the book is like, it got so popular that it's known today under Fannie's name and not like the schools. So like editions started coming out, instead of being like the Boston Cooking School Cookbook, it's just the Fannie Farmer Cookbook. And part of her success is how she wrote her recipes. They were clear and concise, and it was really evident that she tested every single one herself. I mean, as we talked about, Fannie was like really, really passionate about her recipes, which I think really showed through in the cookbook. In an article for the Ladies' Companion, she had a little blurb that she wrote. Nicole, would you please read the little blurb in green?
I, for one, have no patience with the housewife who always serves her vegetables plain boiled. It is impossible to raise cookery above a mere drudgery if one does not put heart and soul into the work. Then, and then only, it becomes the most enjoyable of household duties. If reliable recipes are at hand, try them, and you will be repaid 1,000 times by family praise. This is kind of reminding me of doing like a way throwback to the very beginning, but like what Sylvester Graham wrote about how like the woman of the house needs to like be putting love and care into what she's cooking. It's a different angle here for sure, but it kind of just reminds me of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true, right? Of like you should, like, yeah, we got to eat to live, but sometimes you should try.
Yeah, and we'll discuss later, but this, and I think some of Sylvester Graham's sort of ideology was really influenced by the domestic science movement at the time, which really does focus around the fact that, like, it is the mom/wife's duty to care for her family by making food, and you have to make the best food possible to essentially have, like, the best children possible. We'll get into that, like, a little more later, but yeah. Moving into her later years, Fannie also wrote several other books besides just the Boston Cooking School Cookbook. She also wrote Chafing Dish Possibilities.
What a name.
Published in 1898. Catering for Special Occasions with Menus and Recipes, published 1911. A Book of Good Dinners for My Friends, or What to Have for Dinner, 1914. And Food and Cookery for the Sick and Convalescent, 1904.
That one's also good. Convalescent is a word that we don't use much, but it really tickles me for some reason.
I really like the title, A Book of Good Dinners for My Friends.
Yeah, that one's nice.
It's like, let's just have a nice dinner together.
It's very Friendsgiving.
It is very Friendsgiving. In her later years, Fannie also traveled when she lectured and taught. She was a busy lady. She liked taking railroad trips to New York to dine in famous restaurants like Delmonico's, Astor Knickerbocker's, and the Waldorf Astoria. Which makes sense because she also had famous recipe dupes from places like Delmonico's and others. So she liked going to these places, eating their food, and then being like, I could make this. And then putting it in her cookbooks.
Oh, nice. Okay, I was going to ask, is that like they took her recipe or she took theirs?
She took theirs, yeah.
Now, this has me wondering, like, the time periods are such that there is a possibility that Fannie... Well, no, because she wasn't going out west. If she's just going up and down the East Coast, probably not. Because I was going to say, like, did she ever ride on the Santa Fe Railway and perhaps partake of a Harvey house? But
probably
unless she's going
not.
to that side of the country, probably not. Which is a shame.
But, I'm guessing a lot of other railroads were heavily influenced by the success of Harvey restaurants, and she probably visited places much like them.
That's true. It doesn't all have to be about Fred Harvey.
But isn't it all just about Fred Harvey? Isn't
it
about
really
Fred Harvey?
Really, when you think about it, doesn't it all just always come back to... No.
In the 5 years following the publication of the BCSCB, the Boston... Sorry, I just have, like, this acronym over and over.
I mean, that's fair. It's a lot of words.
The Boston Cooking School doubled in class size. Her lectures grew to over 3,000 students per year. She needed a second assistant. She had 2 assistants. And she even lectured at Harvard Medical School.
Whoa. Just about, like, proper diet and stuff?
So she had, like, that book for the sick and convalescent.
Oh, good point. They know all about sick and convalescents at Harvard Medical School.
Mm-hmm. And so it was talking about, like, nutrition for those who are sick or invalid. And so, like, at the Boston Cooking School, the curriculum was organized to teach, like, science and cookery in short time for women who weren't really becoming cooks. It was more for, like, people who would have servants to cook the food for them. And Fannie believed that the normal course put too much emphasis on scientific theory and not enough on, like, actually cooking or, like, practical teaching in the kitchen. So, like any girl boss should, she left the Boston Cooking School in 1902 to start her own Miss Farmer's School of Cookery in the fall of 1902. And the last class of the Boston Cooking School was in 1903.
Wow, that did not take long, huh?
So she left and it completely collapsed.
Wow, everybody bailed.
Yep.
That's almost funny. Like, kind of sad that the institution was around for, a decent amount of time. They were just like, nah, never mind.
Yeah.
Actually, never mind.
Fannie Farmer's School of Cookery, her courses all focus on actually making food. And so it was like simple dishes, elaborate, entertaining dinners, fancy cookery, but it also included stuff like marketing. So if you were if you had some sort of business in food, how to market that, how to shop at local markets, and crash courses on cooking and housekeeping for women who needed to know fast, like if they were about to get married or inherit a estate or something like that. During all of this, she also still gave lectures and private lessons and classes on cooking for the ill. She was writing columns and assembling menus every month for the Ladies' Companion magazine. She was revising the Boston Cooking School cookbook. And, like, during this time, she also published those 5 other books. And so she was an incredibly busy lady. Like, she was really girl boss in her way. through life at this point.
Absolutely.
She writes to a friend this little line in green.
Next week, we shall be running 16 hospital classes, 16 private classes, and we start our 3rd marketing class. With the special lessons, we are more than busy. I am working to my limit and am surprised at myself. I think that's really cool also that, like, because a lot of times it's my understanding that, like, when you start your own business, start your own school, I assume it would be the same thing, of, like, it's harder to get off the ground. Even if you are, like, a recognized name, you know? You have to, like, find the resources and staff, but it sounds like, she just sort of, like, kept going at full speed. Like, I don't know if she missed a stride.
I don't think she... Well, actually, I don't have to think. I know she never slowed down. Later in life, Fannie Farmer suffered a stroke. 10 days before her death, she gave a lecture from a wheelchair. And she died at age 57 in 1915. And so she was pretty literally, like, working up until the day she died.
Wow. I was going to ask, so I know that she had, like, a history of, she was really ill for that a lot of time in her, like, 20s, high school. There's the book about, like, cooking for the sick and convalescent. I imagine that that's something that, like, those two are probably related, right?
Yes.
Of, like, she knows what it's like to be very ill, to be disabled, and, like, the crossover between those.
Yeah, exactly. Fannie Farmer often said that, like, the book she was... This makes me, like, a little emotional. But, like, the book she was most proudest of was the Food and Cookery for the Sick and Convalescent. This book was, like, dedicated lovingly to her mother who helped care for her while she was sick.
Mm-hmm.
And written from personal experience because she knew exactly what it was like to be bedridden and restricted for long periods of time while she was recovering. And she wrote about how the quality of nursing affected the mood of the sick person. Like, if you were, mean to the sick person, they're going to feel bad. And so it was important that they had, like, good, tasty food and felt like they were being cared for and loved. And she discusses in the book, like, how people who are sick or children will need, like, special dietary requirements. Like, they can't necessarily eat, like, the same thing that normal people can, and how, like, you as the caretaker should be sensitive to the emotional state of the patient. And so I think it just kind of goes to show how not only was she passionate about food, but she was also kind of passionate about helping people who have been in the same situation that she was in.
Yeah, it bears repeating because, in the year 2024, I think people still don't understand this, but, like, care work is work.
It's work.
If you're caring for an older relative, children, someone with disabilities, like, it's work, man. You have to do so much catering, and not to say, like, it's not worth it or it's a burden, like, that's not what I'm saying at all, but just that, like, it just goes back to the very classic thing that we do in this country, which is we devalue domestic labor because women do it, and we don't value things that women do. There's a crisis in this country right now of, like, we don't have enough nurses and domestic workers for, like, all of the older people. Generally, like, people are living longer, and it's harder and harder to find somebody to care for them. Anyway, that's my own, like, subtopic, but yes, definitely, like, I think food is, like, a big thing of, like, caring for someone, right? Because, like, everybody gotta eat. If that's, like, some simple little thing that you can do to, like, keep their spirits up, especially if they're, like, very ill or going through a rough time, like, yeah, I don't know, do it.
And I think this is not what today's episode is about, but heck, we've been on so many tangents already. What's one more?
Yeah.
People, like, don't really consider or don't really think about how food has such a strong effect on your emotional state. Like, there's, like, the classic adage of, like, oh, nice, like, hot meal.
Right.
But really, like, if you are stuck somewhere and you have to eat bad, bland food every day, you're gonna feel bad. Versus, like, having tasty, home-cooked, or just tasty meals made for you, like, with you in mind, that's gonna make you feel so much better.
The number of, like, meals that I have had when I've not been feeling my best that have been like restorative to me. Like I felt like I was a video game character that like drank a little like HP up or like a little elixir or whatever, and just like immediate boost is just like it's very true. If anybody has ever been sick and you've had, you know, a parent or a caregiver like take care of you and feed you like, you know, like stuff that they know you like that you can eat and all that type of stuff.
We have comfort foods. Like, that's a thing. Comfort foods are a thing. And definitely for me, like, when it's not a soup, it's a pasta. Like, just a simple bowl of pasta and tomato sauce makes me feel better than a lot of other things could. It's a nice hug in your tummy. An inside-out hug that the pasta gives you. Yeah. And at that, shall we have the food fact of the day?
I think we should.
Hooray!
Let's go. So it's not on here because I needed to have like an answer key.
No spoilers.
No spoilers. I didn't want you sneaking peekins. No peeking.
No peekins.
Okay, so I have been reading
Popped Culture.
Yeah, so this is Popped Culture, A Social History of Popcorn in America by Andrew F. Smith. Maybe someday to be friend of the show. Dream guest star.
Dream guest star.
Only hope. I bought this one because I love popcorn. That's one of my... The older I get, the more I'm like, you know what? Popcorn's... They got something going on there. You know?
I've just started craving popcorn an incredible amount.
It is going to get worse.
Oh, no.
And then maybe a little bit better, but then maybe also a little bit worse.
Oh, no. A roller coaster of emotions.
So this book is like, I haven't gotten very far in it yet, but it's like, you know, history of popcorn. Where does popcorn come from? And then in the back, there is a big chunky section that is just historical recipes.
Ooh.
So, because I know that you love them, Julia, we are going to talk about some old-timey recipes today.
Yes!
In a game that I like to call Truth or Pure Poppycock.
I'm so ready!
I thought of that title when I was brushing my teeth the other day, and I was like, that's it. I'm done for today, boys. We nailed it. So the game that we're going to play is I have looked through the back of this book, Popped Culture, A Social History of Popcorn in America, and I have flagged some very wild old-timey recipes. They are all like popcorn recipes that involve popcorn as an ingredient in some way.
Yes.
The game is I am going to give Julia the title or the name of a dish, and it is either going to be real or pure poppycock, and Julia has to guess if it is real or not. So if it is real, for an extra point, you can guess how did they use popcorn in the recipe.
Oh my gosh, okay. I feel nervous. I don't know why I feel nervous.
It's because you've never had to play a game before. You have put the answering of the questions on me with the ice cream or nail polish. Okay, so we have 5 in total. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, number 1. Ding ding. Popcorn custard.
I think that's true.
You think that there is really popcorn custard?
I think that there is a popcorn custard.
It is real!
Yay!
We had to start with a like really wacky one. Okay, for bonus point, how do you think they use the popcorn?
Do they steep the milk or cream for the custard in popcorn?
I'm going to read you the recipe.
Okay.
And we will see if you're right. A lot of these like really wacky ones come from this lady, because he's got the sources in here as well, comes from Mary Hamilton Talbot.
All right.
It's called Popcorn Recipes from 1916. And I do believe that, as you'll hear as I read this, I think this might have been a cookbook published by someone called like Nelson's Popcorn. Because every recipe is like, Nelson's popcorn is great for blah, blah, blah. Okay, so popcorn custard. Heat 1 quart of milk in a double boiler. When warm, stir in the beaten yolks of 4 eggs, 4 tablespoons full of granulated sugar, and a scant tablespoonful of cornstarch, mixed with a little cold water. When this thickens, add 3/4 of a cupful of Nelson's corn after it is popped and ground, and a teaspoonful of almond extract. When cold, cover with a meringue made by whipping the whites of the eggs to a stiff froth and adding slowly 8 teaspoonsful of powdered sugar and a few spoonsful of tart jelly, preferably currant.
All right, so no, they did not steep the popcorn. They just chopped it up and then mixed it in.
Yep.
Ah, dang.
Which is really just what a lot of these recipes are. It's like a normal ass recipe, and then they're like, but what if we put popcorn in it?
But what if there was popcorn?
What if we just ground up some popcorn and threw that in there for a fun little twist? Round 2. Ding, ding, ding. Popcorn pancakes.
Fake. Pure poppycock.
Man, you are really fast with these. Yes, that one is fake. Or at the very least, it is not listed in the book that I have here. There may be some recipe for popcorn pancakes that exists out there in the world, but
it is not in this book.
All right, 2 out of 3 points.
Woo!
Pretty good. Ding ding, round 3. Macaroni and popcorn. Oh, good. You're actually having to pause and think.
My instinct is to say pure poppycock. So I think I'm going to say pure poppycock.
No, it's real.
What?
Yeah. Macaroni and popcorn is a real recipe.
These people be wildin'. Can I guess that they ground up some popcorn and just mix it in there?
Let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what they did. So, this is again from Mary Hamilton Talbot's Popcorn Recipes, 1916. I don't know what Mary was... she's clearly... I don't know what Mary was eating. Popcorn. Obviously popcorn.
Nothing
Nelson's
else.
popcorn.
This girl's gonna get pellagra.
Okay, so macaroni and popcorn. Cook 1 cupful of macaroni, broken into inch lengths, in boiling salted water until tender. Drain and pour cold water through it to separate the pieces. Then add cream sauce made with 4 tablespoonsful of flour, the same quantity of butter, salt, and pepper to taste, and a cupful of milk. Add 2 cups full of Nelson's corn after it is popped and ground. Pour into a buttered baking dish, cover with buttered crumbs and a little grated cheese, and bake until a golden brown. They don't even put any on top. They just sort of mix it in.
I feel like that's a wasted opportunity. I feel like if you have ground up popcorn, just mix it with the cheese and put it on top.
Yeah, I definitely have made macaroni, macaroni and cheese that has a crumble topping.
Yeah.
You know?
Do I get a point for guessing correctly that they just ground it up and mix it in there?
Sure.
Yay!
Yeah, let's say so. Yay! Okay. All right, so that was number 3. Okay, round 4.
Ding, ding.
Ding, 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 ding. Popcorn omelet.
I don't want to think about this one because I don't like it.
You have to.
I'm going to say... Oh, I felt so confident in the first half, and now I'm just it can't possibly be real. Pure poppycock. What?
It's real.
No!
I debated about putting this one because I was like, oh, it's kind of boring that they would have it as an omelet, but...
Do they grind it up and put it in there?
There's 2 recipes in here for a popcorn omelet that are pretty similar. One of them is from our friend Mary Hamilton Talbot, 1916, Popcorn Recipes. So I'm going to read the other one just so that it's a little something different.
A little variety.
So this is from May Bell Brooks in Good Housekeeping in 1913. And they stylize this as pop-corn. Sometimes it's 2 words, sometimes it's 1 word, no dash. Style is meaningless. Pop-corn omelet. Add 1/2 cupful of milk to 1 cupful of ground popcorn and let stand 20 minutes. Beat the whites and yolks of 4 eggs separately and add them with 1 teaspoonful of pepper to the other ingredients. Melt 2 tablespoons of butter in an omelet pan. Add the mixture and cook slowly for 10 minutes. Place the pan in a moderate oven to finish cooking the top. Fold over carefully and garnish with parsley and a sprinkling of popcorn. Now see, May Bell Brooks understands the assignment.
Yeah.
Put some on top.
Yeah, put some on top.
Well, she recommends that you put it in with the milk.
Yeah,
and kind of have it soak in there.
She steeps it and then she sprinkles it on top. So she does not grind it up and mix it in per se. All right, last one.
We're on number 5. Round 5. Ding, ding, ding.
Well, now I have to think about this logistically because the first one was true. The second one was false. And then the next 2 were true. And so in my little brain, I'm thinking this one has to be false. But I'm also like, what if Nicole is being extra tricky?
What if I'm playing psychological warfare
what if
games
you're playing,
on your mind?
What if you are being the eldest daughter and playing like extreme girl boss games?
What if I'm playing 4D chess?
Yeah, you're playing like 4D popcorn chess right now. Okay, give me the name of it.
I was going to say I haven't even told you what it is yet.
I was so ready to be like false.
Okay. Number 5. Popcorn hot chocolate.
Okay, now I'm playing the 4D popcorn chess in my brain right now. Would you have gone for only one false and a bunch of true? I don't think so. I think you'd have at least 2 false. So I'm going to say pure poppycock.
Yay! You got it. You didn't let yourself get psyched out at the last minute. Yeah. Popcorn hot chocolate is, at the very least, not in this book. It was a snack that I enjoyed a lot.
What?
In the winter months as a child. Maybe not, like, together. Not, like, putting the popcorn in the hot chocolate, but I did enjoy having popcorn with hot chocolate, like, separately. I'm not a freak, okay? I'm a very normal person, obviously.
You're not Mary Hamilton Talbot or whatever her name was?
No, I think that's it. That's quite good.
Oh, thank you. I think what helped me sort of know that the pancake one and the hot chocolate one were false, because in original recipes for, like, pancakes, they used corn flour or corn starch or, like, cornmeal to thicken it. And then in hot chocolate, they would use, I don't remember, South America, they would use, like, corn starch or corn powder or flour to thicken the hot cocoa as well. And so I was like, they wouldn't put popcorn in there because corn already existed in those things. That was the 4D chess happening in my head.
I think you still did pretty well. I mean, you got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I think you got like 4 out of 6 points or something like that. Nay. So certainly a passing grade.
A passing grade.
Yay!
I look forward to our next, is it blank or blank?
Yeah.
Game.
Yeah, I don't know why we've strayed so far from the feminist morals. We have now reduced ourselves to binary thinking. Oh no.
Well, that just means we have to step it up and add a tertiary option. Yeah. Exactly.
Is this ice cream sundae, nail polish,
or popcorn
recipe?
That would be pretty wild.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, there are some other silly, strange recipes in the back of that book, so I may pull this out again.
Yay!
As a game. Thank you for playing, folks at home. I hope you won. You're a winner in my heart.
You're a winner.
You know who else is a winner?
Fannie Farmer.
Girl boss Fannie Farmer.
Absolute
I'd love to know more about her.
Fannie Farmer. All right, so let's get wiggy with it.
Let's get wiggy with it.
Let's get wiggy, baby. All right, so now that we've kind of talked about Fannie Farmer as a person, let's kind of talk about the context around her in society and how she influenced it. So Fannie was, kind of in the mainstream in the late 19th century. And the late 19th century was a time when science and technology were gaining kind of like an aura of divinity, in the sense that science was kind of infallible. This was like, again, a lot of industrialization, a lot of scientific leaps were happening during this time.
The era of progress, capital P.
Yeah, we figured out that you gotta wash your hands, or your icky hands will kill other people if you're a surgeon. Important stuff like that, it was a crazy time. Industrialization changed the lifestyle of the American. There were a lot of new fancy technological advances, like the light bulb, the telephone, the typewriter, and the calorie. The calorie.
Whoa.
For women, this scientific excitement was most readily available to them via the domestic sphere of cooking, housework, and raising a family, so like traditional womanly things, since they were not necessarily let to be involved in the in the more masculine sciences.
Ladies can't do science. It's too much for tiny female brain.
Nope.
Their uterus is going to wander all around their body and just, it'll be so bad.
It'll be so bad. They won't be able to ride a train because the uterus will just fly right out of them.
Yep, just fly right out through the window.
Unfortunately, with this sort of like scientific advance and this desire for women to want to be a part of it, but only really have like the domestic sphere to express themselves with, not all women, of course, like there are definitely women scientists, but most of them kind of only had the domestic sphere to express themselves with. It kind of came like a not like other girls situation where like these women who were very into domestic science saw the traditional way of doing housework as like irrational and unprofessional and should be like more like the regulated style of work at an office or a factory or an assembly line.
If this happened today, this would be like a TikTok trend where like the TikTok moms shame other TikTok moms for like, if you're not doing this for your child, it's child abuse.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, it is exactly that. But the industrialization era was kind of also the birth of the American like efficiency obsession, where it's like if we are not doing this to like the most efficiency, it's trash, it's utter garbage.
That's capitalism, baby.
Capitalism, baby. And so these women were doing housekeeping, but they were applying scientific principles and also patriotism. By that I mean there was this boom of the science and technology, and how can we use it to best nurture like America's greatness? Like how can we make America even better with all this new scientific advancement? And obviously if we don't apply science to the home to make it the best that it can be, it's our fault as women if we're poor, or if there's disease, or if our husbands have alcoholism, or if they're unemployed.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, that one's on us for sure.
And it was the American housekeeper alone who could guide the nation's homes out of their chaos and into the scientific era.
See, this is also very Sylvester Graham to me. I think this is a little bit after him, but definitely still like similar mindset.
Yeah, and so it was just like this major domestic reform movement that sprang up in the northeast part of the United States and like rapidly spread through the country. It had like several names like scientific housekeeping, home science, progressive housekeeping, but then it settled into domestic science.
Is this where we get home economics from?
It is how we get home economics.
Oh boy.
That was like a little bit out of scope for this episode, but yes. So like the women who were very much leaders of the domestic science movement wanted to bring that into schools, and that's how you get home ec. The vice president of National Domestic Science Organization stated that looking at the affairs of the household in this new light, progressive women have perceived with a growing sense of freedom how that which has seemed such endless drudgery can, by clear understanding of underlying principles and the application of scientific methods, be changed into beautiful harmony of law and order. So essentially they're just kind of like, the old traditional ways are boring and gross, but if we do them with science, they can be new and cool. It, like I said, it's a lot of I'm not like other girls energy. And so, of course, you know, domestic sphere, domestic movement, everything was deeply interested in food and reforming American eating habits and essentially reforming Americans. Domestic scientists were interested in the nutritional properties of food and how it is able to promote physical, social, and moral growth. Just as a reminder for the context of the era, a lot of scientific thinking was coming out during this time, and not all of it was great. Think eugenics.
It's so funny to me, the number of like we were joking, like, oh, it always goes back to Fred Harvey. It actually always goes back to eugenics.
It actually does always go back to eugenics, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was
Jesus
just like these thoughts and the scientific sort of theory and mindset that like how you live determines like your moral standing, in the sense of like you have to eat good food in order to be a good person, and it is like our duties and our job as women in America to make sure that our children are like the most morally, social, and like physically good and healthy and the best that they can be. And so domestic science would recast women's lives in terms of the future and progress and halt the sentimental, quote, ignorant ways of a mother's kitchen and just like catapult forward into like the scientific age.
See, that's so interesting because I mean, like, maybe this is just going back to the like age-old tension between like rational versus emotional, right? Of like the attitude, it seems like at this point is like, okay, we need to be like rational and measured and like very scientific about how we approach the home.
Yeah.
Right? But we do also need to cast it, as you said, in this like moral light, or like it also needs to be at least somewhat emotional in the sense of like the mother or the wife of the home should be catering to the emotions of her husband and children and like putting a lot of love and care and everything like that into her domestic work so that they then are good, proper people. I don't know. I think it's interesting that like both of those kind of coexist, it seems like.
Yeah, I think it's because like there's this compartmentalization in the brain of like, I am doing this in a scientific way to better my family based on like the scientific understanding around me versus like being the emotional support for your family because they need like emotional. I don't know if that makes sense, but like,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, definitely in this time of thinking, it was more of like, this is what's scientifically proven, so I'm going to do it scientifically. But, you know, all of this fad essentially ended by World War I, pesky little thing, and scientific cookery was no longer viral, but it had essentially changed the way in which women thought about cooking. And so it kind of created this mindset and this trend that cooking is like not only for the home, but it has to be like nutritional, it has to be scientific. You can't just like cook anything. We have traces of this today, right? Where it's like you said, those TikTok moms being like, if you feed your kid junk food, like you're doing child abuse.
How dare your kid eat a Lucky Charm?
Yeah, like almond moms.
Yes, yeah.
So, like, I don't know, Sylvester Graham and all that other stuff, these trends stick around for a long time within, like, the cultural zeitgeist and don't really ever leave. And so it was definitely there when Fannie Farmer was, you know, doing all of her stuff. But unlike her colleagues, Fannie Farmer never claimed to be anything other than just like other girls. She said, I am not an advanced scientist, I'm not a philosopher or a moral guide. But she said she thought of herself as a businesswoman.
So she saw that meme of Willem Dafoe from Spider-Man where he says, you know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Yes.
And she said, no, not me.
No. I am a business. I'm girl boss. I girl bossed
exactly.
my way. And she did, as we talked about. She girl bossed her way. Very hard. So hard that she died. Maybe.
Yes. Cause of death, girl bossing.
She girl bossed. But she did not gatekeep. And so coming back to Fannie Farmer and sort of her impact on the sphere that she was in, like I said, probably like one of her biggest claims to fame is the Boston Cooking School Cookbook, or the BCSCB. She was all about her business, and her business was teaching women how to cook in school, in lectures, and in her cookbooks. Her recipes were precise and replicable, which is perfect for Americans that had new scientific cooking equipment, like the standardized measuring cups and spoons, which were new at the time.
And I think chemical leaveners are also somewhat new at this time. And by that, I just mean like baking soda and baking powder.
Yeah, exactly. Like Jell-O and stuff, that's also new. The stoves that were being advertised, those were new. And so there was like a lot of new equipment that people didn't know how to use. And then there were cookbooks like Fannie Farmer's that kind of told people how to do it. And this is like industrialized America. And like we kind of talked about in my restaurant episode, people no longer lived where they could eat and work at the same time. Like they
right.
now had commutes. They now like lived away from friends and family. And so they weren't learning these recipes orally like they would have before. And so cookbooks were kind of becoming more popular as ways to replicate dishes, as ways for people to learn how to cook without getting that oral instruction.
Because at this point, I mean, you may have a telephone. It's still pretty new and pretty expensive, but like if you're living in the city, you're a big city gal, living your big city dreams, it's probably harder for you to call your mom at home and be like, hey, how do you make that beef stroganoff or whatever?
Like maybe you could write a letter, but your mom would just write back like, oh, I threw in some beef and I threw in some stroganoff and I mixed it up. And you'd be like, thanks, Mom, that was not helpful. Fannie Farmer, not only did she sort of like standardize what a cookbook should look like, she also like helped instate American cuisine. We talked a little bit, I think, about Amelia Simmons in one of our previous episodes. And she kind of had like the first American cookbook, American Cookery, and that was published in 1796. And in that cookbook, it's considered like the true first American cookbook because it uses like North American ingredients like, quote, pumpkins, cranberries, and Indian corn. And pretty much exactly 100 years later, Fannie Farmer would kind of do the same thing again by creating like a super American cookbook by having ingredients and recipes that were essentially like hamburgers, French fries, peanut butter, and jelly.
We know them.
We know them. We love them. In the 19th century industrialization, cookbooks like Fannie Farmer's Boston Cooking School Cookbook also offered comprehensive household advice, like we said, to replace like friends and family who would have taught them. And so kind of like with her cooking class, there were lessons on like how to shop, how to organize, how to can things, how to manage a household. Like I mentioned earlier, she also helped standardize like what a recipe even was. I have a pretty lengthy quote here from the Rise of Cookbooks in America. This quote just kind of talks about how recipes used to be and why they were poo-poo.
Would you like me to read it?
I would like you to read it. Take a big breath.
Okay, I shouldn't have done that. Standardization of weights and measures driven by industrial innovation also fueled the rise of the modern American recipe. For most of the 19th century, recipes usually consisted of only a few sentences giving approximate ingredients and explaining basic procedure, with little in the way of an ingredient list and with nothing resembling precise guidance on quantities, heat, or timing. The reason for such imprecision was simple. There were no thermometers on ovens, few timepieces in American homes, and scant tools available to ordinary people to tell exactly how much of an ingredient they were adding. Recipe writers in the mid-19th century struggled to express ingredient quantity, pointing to familiar objects to estimate how much of a certain item a dish needed. One common approximation, for instance, was the weight of 6 eggs in sugar. It's bizarre. They also struggled to give instructions on temperature, sometimes advising readers to gauge an oven's heat by putting a hand inside and counting the seconds they could stand to hold it there. Sometimes they hardly gave instructions at all. A typically vague recipe from 1864 for rusks, a dried bread, read in its entirety, quote, 1 pound of flour, small piece of butter, big as an egg, 1 egg, 1/4 pound white sugar, gill of milk, 2 great spoonfuls of yeast, end quote. Okay, I have several thoughts here.
Yes.
This sort of like description that they're giving of recipes definitely reminds me of like some of the recipes that I read for pumpkin pie, where it's just like, yeah, you know, just stew it for a while and then, put it in a crust and it's probably good. The other thing that I wanted to mention was where they're talking about like, oh, put your hand inside the oven and count how long. That I have heard before at the Virginia Renaissance Festival, which I've been to several times. There's a lady there that gives cooking demos, which I just like, I want to be this lady's best friend. Mm-hmm. She's so cool. Anyway, so that's one thing that I remember from one of her lectures before was like, that's how you would tell roughly how hot your oven was. So if you could put your hand like either on or like near the oven and say, because of course they're all Christians, 1 Hail Mary or 2 Hail Marys or however many Hail Marys you could say, would say like, okay, 1 Hail Mary is hot enough for this, 2 Hail Marys is hot enough for this, right? The idea being that like it's like a standardized, like, you know, it's like the ABCs or whatever, where like it takes you a certain amount of time to like say it. And so that gives you like, okay, well, if I can leave my hand here for this long, it's roughly this hot. So anyway, I'm just like, oh, I know about that. That's cool.
Yeah. I guess it would depend on how high your heat tolerance is.
That too, yeah.
You know me, I'd stick my hand in an oven just to prove that I could.
She's up here with 14 Hail Marys and her hands on fire, but she just keeps going. Julia, no, stop.
Julia,
no, I
please.
can do one more.
The pie is burnt to a crisp, and so is your hand. So yeah, Fannie Farmer entered like cooking school about like the same time that standard measures started to become standard. And so you had like half-pint measuring cups first appearing in the 1880s. Like the quote that you just read said, like, people would just be like, I don't know, a bit of butter about the size of an egg. Stop bothering me. They also had measuring spoons and things like Pyrex cups that had like markings for like thirds and quarters coming soon. And so she was sort of trained to cook with these things from the start, which makes sense as to why she was like, we gotta use these. If you don't use these, if you keep freestyling, your cake's never gonna come out right. Her claim to fame was being the mother of level measurements. That was a title she was given, because back then a lot of recipes would have like your cup full of flour rounded or like heaping. Like we still kind of see this sometimes today, where it's like one heaping cup of brown sugar or whatever. And so Fannie like essentially kicked down the door to that house and said no. And she made it very strict in her cooking and in her teaching and in her books that you would scoop and like fill your cup with flour, and then you take the back of a knife and scrape off the extra so that your flour was like level with the top of your measuring cup. And we do that with like baking soda and like baking powder. Most baking powder little tins have that lip for you to like level out your teaspoon.
It's real nice.
It is real nice. The focus on consistency and standardization was very new, and like she definitely wasn't the first person to like standardize working with measuring cups or measuring spoons or like having measures in a recipe, but she was the one who made it essentially mainstream and common and the basis for recipes that we have today. She was a pretty incredible person, and I could honestly keep going about all the cool stuff she did, but we are almost at 2 hours of recording.
Are we?
I have this final quote that I'll read from The Rise of Cookbooks about, you know, Fannie Farmer and the power of her sort of standardized recipe. Designed as a teaching tool for a mobile society, the modern recipe is grounded in principles of clarity, precision, and replicability that emerged clearly from the conditions of early American life. They are principles that continue to guide and empower cooks in America and around the world today.
Clap it out for a real one.
And so, yeah, Fannie Farmer wasn't only just like the greatest girl boss of all time, but she also really changed the way that we wrote cookbooks and has like an incredible lasting impact. There was a quote that I saw from someone that said, anyone who loves cooking knows Fannie Farmer. And I think that's true.
Whether you do or not, yeah, the recipes that, or like the structure of recipes that we have today is definitely like due to her.
She was a very incredible lady. And obviously, you know, she cared very much about what she did and the people she wanted to help, and, you know, empowering women who wanted to cook to be able to do it in the context of the time in terms of like science and nutrition. And I think like even just thinking about it like a broader sense, to be an unmarried woman at the time and to be so successful was really rare, you know?
Yeah.
She never married, and she owned her own business like until she died, and she had multiple books, and she made like a lot of money off of those books. And she was just kind of like this incredible hulking figure in the culinary sphere.
As much as we joke about like, oh, girl boss, like, I mean, she really was like you said, like a real legend, you know, or
Yeah.
like accomplished so much, especially since she died, like, you know, she's only 57, and, you know, a large part of her life was also like she was ill and obviously not cooking, but it's really incredible to think about like what she accomplished and like her lasting legacy. So if you at home are like grateful that we now have like specific quantities of things and recipes or like ingredients, or if you or someone you know or love is like the maybe like quote unquote like terrible chef, or they like do not really know their way around the kitchen, but you could give them a recipe and they like can follow it and can like successfully cook from it, then like you can thank Fannie Farmer.
Yeah. You like America's Test Kitchen? Thank Fannie Farmer. She was the first America's Test Kitchen, really.
Her kitchen was America's test kitchen. Think about that.
Wow. Insert forlorn American anthem here.
This is a sad, slow
Just
version
a sad,
of the national
slow
anthem.
national anthem as we put our hands on our heart and we stare at the American flag, and then a superimposed picture of Fannie Farmer appears.
Yeah.
And a single tear rolls down my face.
This is my America. I think it's really nice to reflect on that kind of legacy. I always try to end with like a silly joke or something, but I'm like, no, like let's be genuine. Let's put on our big girl aprons, our silly little white hats.
Yeah, let's enjoy an ending of an episode that's not sad for once.
Yeah. She did it.
She did it. Yay.
And we did it.
we
We
did
finished the episode.
Yeah, 2 hours.
Thanks
for lunching with us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Our theme music is Red Onions by Louis Zong. Please check out the rest of his album Vegetable Soul in the description. You can follow us on Twitter at Girls Lunch. Nicole is also on Twitter at NicoleH262, and her website is NicoleHilton.com. Julia is smarter than all of us and not on social media. Thank you for listening.
You're so much better at scatting than me.
Am I? Am I the scat man? Skibbity bop, skibbity beep beep, ba dub, dubbity beep bop, skip. Put that in the blooper reel.